Good evening. Thanks so much for coming out tonight. My name is Megan McAdow, and I'm the director at the Marshall and Frederick Sculpture Museum here at SVSU. And I'm pleased to be able to introduce tonight's speaker, Brian McCarty, who's an internationally exhibited artist and toy industry veteran. McCarty's exhibition, titled War Toys, Israel, West Bank, and Gaza Strip, is currently on view at the museum until September 25th. Viewers of War Toys will see McCarty's photographs presented alongside children's drawings that were created while living in war-torn areas of the Middle East. Featuring locally found toys placed and posed in the actual locations described by children, the photographs recreate shared fears and witnessed events while also documenting the plastic playthings available to boys and girls in those areas. Since 2011, McCarty has worked with local humanitarian organizations in Israel and the Palestinian Territories, conducting art-based sessions with children who were severely affected by this conflict. With the help of specialized therapists and caregivers, questions were posed to the children to understand the events that they had witnessed, and they were invited to create pictures about their lives and their experiences. Brian McCarty is a photographer, art director, and producer known for his unique work with toys. While comfortable in his studio, his preferred approach is to integrate toy characters into real-life situations through the use of forced perspective, working in camera with very little post-production. Since graduating Parsons School of Design in 1996, Brian has worked for some of the biggest names in the toy industry, including Mattel, Hasbro, Disney, Cartoon Network, and Nickelodeon. His unique photography has not only driven millions in sales, it also has earned wide recognition in the art field. His first monograph, Art-Toys, was published in 2010 and featured collaborations with toy makers and designers who also use toys as mediums for artistic expression. Brian's independent series, War Toys, launched soon after in 2011. Brian's work has been exhibited by museums and universities, acquired by prominent collectors, and covered by the New York Times, Washington Post, Guardian, Wired, Al Jazeera, Reuters, BuzzFeed, Huffington Post, and countless other publications throughout the world. He's appeared on CNN, PRI's The World, PBS NewsHour, BBC World Service, and CBC's Q. Brian has earned a Fulbright, grants from the U.S. Department of State, and indirect support from the NEA. He has lectured at the Carter Presidential Library, New School, Sesame Workshop, American University of Beirut, and TEDx. He's seen his work used in a billboard in Times Square and also stolen by ISIS for online propaganda. Brian understands how much toys shape and reflect our culture. In addition to the exhibition at the museum, we are hosting some great programs and events in conjunction. So we have free drop-in activities on art activities and workshops on select Saturdays, a fascinating lunch and learn series with a free catered lunch. So there's a lot of reasons to come back to the museum and see this exhibition and learn about different perspectives. Be sure to visit our website or follow us on Facebook for up-to-date details on all of our programs and events. Thanks again for coming out tonight. So please, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Brian McCarty.
Good night, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. I'm going to take some time tonight take you through sort of a crash course on the process behind War Toys, some of the motivation behind it, some of the methodology that was developed specifically for the project, and then go through some examples, just give you a better understanding of the project entirely. So War Toys starts with children. The goal of the project is to work with children who have been affected by war and tell their stories. You can go to a war zone, shove a camera in a child's face, and ask them to tell you what happened to them. And you'll never get that, or at least not anything that's useful. It takes going in and really understanding them and using a subjective approach. Art and play are incredibly powerful tools. And going in with an art therapist, is what I do, really makes it so you can unlock the stories that they have locked inside them in safe ways, in ways that don't cause more harm to them. Since 2014, I've traveled with a brilliant art therapist from Beirut named Mira Assad. This is her working with a young girl named Noor in Iraq 2 years ago. Noor created a drawing about her family and her fleeing Mosul. What she said and what she drew became art direction for the photo that I created in Mosul. After the drawing is made, I roam the open-air markets of northern Iraq looking for toys, some brand new, made in China. Others are used, and more fascinating to me, they're toys cleaned out in your attic and given to Goodwill or Salvation Army or whomever, and they're bundled by the kilo and sold to places like Iraq and resold in open-air bazaars for a few pennies. So, with the drawing, with the story, I cast toys as if different characters and take them to the actual place. In this case, this is East Mosul, 2017, just a few weeks after it had been liberated. The billboard is still up for ISIS. Graffiti still says, ISIS is never leaving. And set up toys in the middle of this active war zone. And it's so bizarre, it's so weird that, soldiers walking by looking at this stupid American curled in a little ball taking pictures of toys had to stop and figure out, what is this guy doing? So I just invited him to take a look. And this is what he saw with the camera. So this process has been repeated countless times with children from Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, West Bank, Gaza Strip, Israel. But for me, it started with Vietnam. In 1996, fresh out of college, I was recruited into a creative research center in Italy called Fabrica. While there, I was invited to do an exhibition in Zagreb, in Croatia, right after the war had ended. And for it, I thought about my father's experiences in Vietnam and his reluctance to talk about it. He just never would. And one time, to shut me up, he recounted a story of playing with tin soldiers and toy guns as a child, all the while hearing about his hero dad who died in World War II. And he viewed it all as indoctrination, as sort of what led him to think it was his duty to enlist and fight in Vietnam. He's quite bitter about it. So for the exhibition, without his stories, I found the letters he wrote to my mother, talking about the first time he got shot at, or the first time he was under heavy fire. And I used this vintage toy, this G.I. Joe from the 1960s, to kind of recreate those moments. I was 21 years old, it wasn't the most brilliantly photographed thing ever. Benetton owns that work, so I can't show it, which is kind of a blessing, to be honest. In the years that followed, the seeds of that idea stuck with me. The idea of using toys to look at war, for people who haven't been in war, to kind of deconstruct, to filter through play the experiences. I also thought about myself as a child and how I react to traumatic events in my life and the traumas of my childhood and the things I heard about happening in the U.S. around me. In 1984, a man walked into McDonald's in San Ysidro, California, and started killing people, including this kid on his BMX bike. And this picture was on the cover of every newspaper the next day. I saw it. I went so far as to cut it out and save it, because it impacted me that deeply. As a kid, my age, who just wanted to go get some french fries. And my mother found it, threw it away, said it's not right to think about these things. But in my drawing and in my play, that event kept playing out. And it's what children do naturally. Whether in therapy or just on their own, they process traumas they experience or things they see in the news through their art, through their play. And this is dinosaurs rebuilding the Twin Towers. This is a child from Darfur. This is from the Spanish Civil War. And this is a child who was born in Auschwitz. And after the war, after she had survived, was taken into a home And in the therapeutic process, this is when art therapy really wasn't a thing yet. They asked her to draw her home, and this is what she drew. So learning about these things, thinking about my own experiences, thinking about that earlier series, War-Toys developed. And in 2011, I made the first trip to East Jerusalem to work at the Spafford Children's Center with children who were undergoing psychosocial treatment for various trauma. This is the very, very first group of War-Toys. There have been countless ones since. And I went into this from a very academic, artistic point of view. I had my methodology, I consulted with experts. I knew what I wanted to get out of it. And I was very, very sympathetic to the kids, but it didn't really hit me until I saw a little girl coloring pools of blood for the first time. You instantly become an activist artist. You instantly want to make a difference and make a change and really listen to these kids and amplify their voices. So what she and the other children were drawing about was a friend of theirs who had been killed in unknown circumstances by the wall by a soldier. And that became the first thing I decided to work on. So I roamed the crowded open-air markets of the old city, found the right toys, found the right things, and off I went to the barrier wall. This is just by the Kalandia checkpoint on the road to Ramallah, right inside the West Bank, or right inside the barrier of the West Bank anyway. And as I'm setting up and doing this, at the checkpoint, there's a massive protest happening behind me. People are descending in droves, chanting, screaming. Riot police come out, fire tear gas and stun grenades and the whole bit. And at that moment was sort of this crossroads for me. Do I stop, turn around, photograph what's happening behind me, the actual human drama happening behind me? Or do I stay focused on this little thing that I'm building? And obviously I kept going. This is a little boy's perspective on life in what was a war zone. And no one else is doing this work, and I feel it was very, very important to do it. There are journalists, real journalists, on both sides of the conflict, capturing from that point of view, but no one's really looking at this from the children's point of view. And that's been the mission going forward. And when there are politically charged imagery, I will use it. But War-Toys is apolitical neutral. I worked with Israelis as Palestinians, I worked with Iraqis, I worked with children who self-identify as ISIS. But this is a great example, and I'll head off. One of you will ask this question, I know. Do the children get to see the work? And ideally, yes. In this case, she did. And she hated it. Absolutely hated it. And it was devastating to me, as this might be my first trip. Working through the interpreter, working through the therapist at the center, and I'm asking, like, okay, wait, what exactly does she, I feel like I'm a little bit licensed. Yeah, I went to the mural of Arafat and that kind of thing, but I feel like I did an okay job here. In the week between the interview and me making the photo and coming back, she had a birthday, and she reached the age where she started wearing her headscarf. And she was mortified that the toy was not wearing a headscarf. So that's how much she identified with the toy character. And that early lesson has carried with me. I've been much more careful about those kinds of sensitivities, but in my defense, it was her birthday. There's no way to know. Still, I feel bad. 8 years later, still feel bad. So moved from there to Dheisheh, to around Bethlehem, and worked with children there. This is a boy who created an extremely elaborate drawing, and it's his dream of a youth uprising against the Israeli incursions into the camp. And for the resulting photo, I took a little bit of artistic license, which I did much more in the beginning. I do less now, I feel. But this is inside the camp, and the mural is of a boy who was a camp martyr. He died after throwing a Molotov cocktail at Israeli forces and was shot dead. And he's who the boy was thinking of when he made this drawing, this elaborate drawing of the youth uprising. From there, I took the project to the Gaza Strip, worked with the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, and conducted art-based interviews in several schools. This is the Al-Fakura Preparatory School and the Jabalia refugee camp. And this is a great example of something I see time and time again in the years to come. It's sort of a de-emphasis of the important elements. I'll show another example after this. This one's a little more obvious, but you've got you know, the wall, you've got things happening in the background, you've got the ambulances, you've got the flags, but when talking to the boy, he really just talked about his fear of playing football with his friends and being killed in an airstrike. This is a result of that. And this is a place where they would play, and a place that's also been hit by a bazillion missiles, because militants will use the same spot where the kids play to launch missiles and then go back and hide it. So similar with the girls there. This is an Asma elementary school in Gaza Strip. And that same thing where you've got everything at the heart of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict represented here. You've got the key symbolizing the right to return, you've got olive trees, you've got soldiers, you've got people being shot. But the girl really only talked about the mother and the baby and the fear. And so, again, it's not just the drawing, it's what the children talk about with the drawings that becomes the art direction. And so this is the response to that. Again, I very carefully chose a head-scarfed doll. It's a full-blood doll. She's like sort of a Barbie in the Middle East. Similarly, this is a girl who made a drawing of herself and many, many different elements. But when talking, only talked about the missiles and the girl, missiles and the girl, missiles and the girl. She was very terrified of airstrikes and successive hits, which is what happens in the Gaza Strip. When something's targeted and wants to be, they want to level it, they'll hit it with a barrage of missiles. And so that's what she talked about. And that's the result of that. This is a crappy bootleg Cinderella keychain that I used because I couldn't find just a simple little girl in the market. The other side of it, they're really kind of messed up looking. But ended up being very appropriate, I thought. And of course, this is the photo that ISIS pissed me off to no end when I discovered it. It's a weird bit of flattery, maybe, I don't know, but also deeply disturbing, since this is really one girl's account of being afraid of war and being afraid of what it encompasses, and this bit of propaganda. You know, Cinderella's been taken out, the ISIS flag has been added, and a copy that says something to the effect of, you know, under the Crusader bombing, we're not going anywhere, essentially. The day before I left Gaza, the whole time I'd been there had been escalation in conflict. Rockets going out, missiles coming in, and it looked like they were ramping up for a war, and the UN wanted me to leave. Before I did, this was one of the last interviews, where I asked them, what do you hope for in the future? It seemed a pretty innocuous kind of thing to ask. And again, I got drawings of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, or they call it Al-Aqsa, really it's a Dome of the Rock they were drawing. And it was this idea of what they were being denied and what really the core of the conflict was over. After I left, literally a few hours after I left, the war really ratcheted up, and over 8 days, Operation Pillar of Defense commenced, and around 1,500 sites within Gaza were hit, and in return, 1,456 rockets were fired out. And as I sat in Jerusalem feeling guilty as hell that I'd gotten out and worried about people I'd met, I did this bit of wish fulfillment. This is a toy from Gaza, taken to the Dome of the Rock, and photographed there. I thought it was disrespectful to show it directly. I also found a toy that was sort of purposely a little messed up, which is a version of the toys they have there. They're just not the best quality, and missing the eyes. So, the morning of the ceasefire, I finally gained access to Israeli children living on just the other side of the border, in a town called Sderot. I know I'm mispronouncing it, and still after all these years can't do it. But the town is such a frequent target of attacks, they've built bunkers all around. And these sort of underground community places where people can sleep, they can eat, they can do whatever they can do, and some will live there for the duration of these prolonged attacks. And the children that we interviewed had been down there, some for 8 or 9 days or more, and were, obviously a little anxious. This is Dr. Benjamin Epstein, who traveled with me, provided by an Israeli NGO called Israel Trauma Coalition. He did a remarkable job with the kids. Similar to Gaza, where we saw the repetition of images, I saw the same thing with the Israeli children, except in this case it was missiles hitting my house, missiles hitting my house, missiles hitting my house. It was the thing they couldn't get out of their mind. And so I thought it was very, very important to sort of capture that in the town with locally found toys, just that idea of the barrage that they feel that they're always dealing with. This is from a young boy who wished he had arms long enough to catch the rockets falling on his house. A little artistic license again with the toy. So a few days later, the conflict died down, schools reopened, and I was able to work with children in one of the schools in Sderot. And this is a boy that shows, so these are missiles coming from Gaza. These are Israeli defense missiles shooting it down. He was very proud of that. But in the bottom left corner is a bus exploding. And for the first time in his life, he was aware of, a few days before, there was a bus bombing in Tel Aviv. And it really put him and the other kids at ease. This is the actual spot in Tel Aviv. And so to recreate his fear and the fears of the other children, went to the actual spot and recreated that scene. The project next moved to Syria. This is Mira Sadr, I mentioned earlier. She's remarkably gifted at what she does. She grew up in the Civil War in Lebanon. She was educated in the U.S. And since working with her, I will work with no other art therapist. So we traveled to the Bekaa Valley, to the Syria-Lebanon border, and worked with the Kayani Foundation. They build schools for Syrian refugees, and still doing amazing things now. And we saw a lot of drawings about the journey, a lot of drawings about life in the camps. This is a before and after drawing. On the right is life in Syria before the war, the dad outside watering the tree, and on the left is life inside the camp with the cold rains, and the father's very conspicuously absent. And these are toys that were just found, a kilometer down the road at a shop, and then brought to the camp to be photographed. Another benefit of the art therapist, another clear example of her power. This is a drawing that on the surface, you go, okay, this is a nice little family at dinner, it's really sweet. I thought it was what the girl missed at home. And what it actually was the last time she saw her father alive. He got up from the dinner table to investigate sounds of fighting outside and was killed. And the family left very soon after that. And this is the recreation of that, done within the camp. And to give a little perspective on what working in the camps can be like, this is the other side of that shot. Kids are bored out of their minds, and anyone with a camera and toys is, instant fodder for entertainment. This is a boy who very clearly lays the blame on Assad. He labeled Assad's helicopter Assad's bomb. This is about the barrel bombs that so indiscriminately kill civilians in Syria. This is another before and after. It's life in a suburb of Aleppo, sunny, happy, great, and then the fire and destruction that came soon after that. This is a girl that I really regret. In Lebanon, for the first time, we were able to do multiple sessions over a couple weeks, work with the children again and again, to not only do the interviews, but provide more therapy than I'd been able to do in the past. And this girl, unfortunately, only showed up at the first session. And what she drew was intense survivor's guilt. She had somehow miraculously survived a missile strike without a scratch that killed the rest of her family and leveled their house. And so this is her in a field of ash, somehow in a magical shield, crying and sad. And then the recreation of that. The project next moved to Iraq, which is where I've put most of my energy in the last few years, or about 10 weeks of work now. We worked with UNICEF and the NGO Churches on Italian, interviewing children in places like the Devaka camps and Hashisham, and their camps for internally displaced Iraqis. And we saw a lot of stories about the journey to get there, what they had to go through to leave the occupied areas or the areas that were being fought over. And this is a boy who had to go through an ISIS checkpoint and watch people being shot there for reasons he couldn't understand. And I felt it was important to kind of give it from his perspective and show what he saw. These are more drawings about the journey, and these are fleeing at night. So that's not a sun, that's the moon. And that's an aircraft overhead, and a story that we saw a few times of these sort of aircraft overhead, unwilling or unable to intervene people fled in the night and ran from soldiers and that sort of thing. And when I did this photo, it was too dangerous to use a flash. We're too close to Mosul, and there were snipers and all kinds of things. So this is lit with a flashlight over a few minutes or more. But I felt it was important to get that account. This is a boy who, even though there's a helicopter shooting a house, he didn't talk about it at all. He only talked about the helicopter killing the girl that we believe was his sister. We didn't ask. In these sessions, we're careful not to pry too much. We can't go too deep. I'll explain more in a minute, but it's always a bit surface because you don't want to leave them worse than you found them, always. This is in a town called Kayara. It's south of Mosul, oil fields, that sort of thing. And when ISIS withdrew about 2 weeks before this, they set the oil fields on fire. And so this is a drawing of burning oil fields and a tank, a Iraqi tank coming and shooting ISIS. And so we went to the burning oil fields, which were heavily mined, but we went with the Iraqi federal police who kept us safe. But I thought this is an important photo to get because it's plastic toys made from oil in a burning oil field. It kind of writes itself. In Iraq and elsewhere, I've seen a lot of this sort of thing, where you look at it on the surface, you go, okay, it's an Angry Bird, and it's kind of neat, and kids like to play with that kind of stuff. And then you start to realize it's a way for the children to talk about their trauma, to talk about things that are scary to them, a step removed. For those who have played the Angry Birds game, they'll know this. The yellow Angry Bird is the one that, when you shoot it up in the air, if you touch it, it shoots down like a missile. And so these drawings are all about the missiles and the airstrikes, and the results of that. It's just a safer way for them to do it. But I felt it was important to represent the series. Another example, this is just from last year. This is a boy who drew the large elephant. It was even labeled an elephant and its calves, or elephant and its family members. And Mira, their art therapist, asked, well, why is that one not colored in? And he finally got around to saying it was a dead sibling. It was dead, gone, but not forgotten. And so it was the ghost of one of his siblings who died. And so did this in Mosul, in the remains of one of the large areas in the old city. And then even when things are more literal, it still takes a level of interpretation and the skill of a gifted art therapist. This is something I didn't see the girl doing this drawing, but Mira was off working with her in a corner and explained to me later on what was going on. And what you can't see from this is the woman hidden in the rocks. And so it started with her drawing a woman, and then she drew all the rocks. And what it was, she was forced to watch a woman being stoned to death for wearing the wrong attire. She then said that she wanted to give the woman a flower. And so Mira had her draw the flower in colors. And I thought it was important to represent what she witnessed, and also the unseen shadow of the man. And again, I'll keep talking about this, but this is why doing this with an art therapist is so important to me. This is a young girl that had been through the worst of the worst. She left, went to her grandmother's, and while she was gone, ISIS had come to their house and murdered her entire family. And in her drawings, she's even showing where each one had been shot. And so even though in the session she's sharing just the worst thing that happened to her ever, through Mira's skill, through the 3 hours that we spend with the kids, of bringing them into this, having them do the drawings, but more importantly, bringing them out and helping them process this. This is the girl at the end of the session, laughing and smiling and playing with the ball. And she became really important, or really memorable to Mira and I, because at the end of the session, Mira went around and said, what do you want to be when you grow up? Pretty standard kid question. And to which we both went, well, her parents are dead, that can't be right. But we started thinking, well, maybe she told us the story of the parents dying as sort of her emotional truth, and maybe there's more to it. But yeah, her sincerity was pretty hard to think that it was anything but true. And so lo and behold, she showed up to a session the next day. A totally different camp, not even the same camp. And she and Mira rebonded, reconnected immediately. And the truth of it was, she had not told anyone in the camp the truth, except to Mira and I, because she wanted the story of her parents told. She was living with her aunt and uncle who were childless, who had adopted her, and the bureaucracy was such that it was just easier to say that that's her parents. And so she didn't dare expose it. So we very quickly told the NGO, said, look, please stop investigating, everything's fine, whatever, that was it. But she, like previous year, had another story to tell, and this was saying goodbye to her teacher, who was killed in Mosul before she left. This is the recreation of that. So, telling these stories really is the main point of War Toys. It is getting the work seen, getting the work understood, advocating for these children in any way I possibly can. I'm very proud that the work is being used by the 8 organizations in their campaigns. I'm very proud that places like here are exhibiting the work, and I'm invited to talk to you all and share these things. One of the missions, too, is sort of the media engagement that I do. This is a story I've told a couple times a day, but it's a great example of what I've reluctantly accepted as a strength of War Toys, and it is the apparent absurdity of a toy photographer in a war zone. It's the strangeness of the photos as a hook. And what this is Huffington Post contacted me many years ago, right after I finished the Gaza trip, and they said, oh, we'd love to do a feature on the work. It's so flattering, gosh, yes, please. And a couple days later, this shows up in the weird news section, to which I am pissed off. Because A, I'm an artist with a capital A, and B, I'm like, these are kids, this is their accountants at war, this is really serious, this is so messed up. And I call the editor and I start ripping off her face, and she says, we knew you'd feel this way. Here's the deal. Weird News gets 50 times the viewership of Arts or World or even just the news section. Said, you need to start seeing as an asset the fact that your thing can be in Weird News and get the eyeballs. You're reaching audiences who never think about this stuff. And I got over my ego real quick, and I accepted this. And get that this is a strength of the project. It is that, I hate to term it this way, but it is a little bit of entertainment that will get folks to pay attention, to look at this from perspective of empathy. Whether it's them playing, their kids playing, whatever it is, it's breaking down these barriers between us all and realizing we're all in this together. I'm very proud that this is sort of one of the first times I talk about War Toys is now a nonprofit organization. So we're continuing the advocacy work like this. We're now training caregivers in the field to continue the art therapy work after we leave. And now also developing a program, the World Food Program. And this is kind of fun stuff. After seeing the same sacks of food everywhere, have revitalized a project or concept from the 1930s, from the Depression era. Flour and sugar makers realized that folks are taking the sacks and making dolls and dresses and all kinds of stuff out of them. And so now, working with the World Food Program to do something similar on the sacks of food that go around the world. So we can get cheap, hand knot tied, not even sewn, dolls, puppets, whatever you can think of, to the hands of children, millions of children around the world, at little to no cost. So these are the types of things that the nonprofit's going to be working on, and I'm very, very excited for. But that's kind of my talk. I'll open it up to you guys to ask me whatever you want, because I'm sure I've forgotten all kinds of stuff. But please feel free to ask anything.
What country has the most propaganda as far as toys? Or uses toys in propaganda?
Oh, toys is propaganda? Oh, wow. All of them? I mean, since China is such a single source of manufacturing, and the Chinese design, the evergreen in-house designs, whatever you're going to call it, are such a source that China really is where it all begins. Now, I don't think it's purposeful propaganda. I think it's just folks trying to make money. One of the other, weirdly enough, projects of the nonprofit is working with Chinese manufacturers to make small changes to their lines. So the Fulbright I got a couple years ago, I started this work. And doing something as simple as, you know, your standard bag of armament you find everywhere on the planet, literally everywhere on the planet. If you can just get a civilian inserted in the bag, or a family, or a war photographer, anything, just one single thing, it changes the inherent play pattern. So it's no longer just two armies fighting. It can be a photographer documenting, it can be the family running away, it can be rescued, and it can be killed. Whatever it is, it just takes it from that straight combatant role of us versus them into a different type of play. And so I'm looking forward very much to working with the Chinese manufacturers to just make those little tiny tweaks in their lines to sort of de-propagandize the things that are really intentionally bad, but they are. So, a bit of a long-winded answer, but sorry.
I think it's very moving what you're doing. I think it's very incredibly subtle, and yet it kind of upends things. It makes us think of the war gamers of our society, really the most violent on earth in some ways, constantly at war within itself. I saw inner city kids that did this type of art therapy, drawing about the murders that had taken place in their neighborhoods, their family members that were killed. Imagine you could have the same thing with the mass murders that we have become accustomed to in our society, that we just accept as a norm. I think one of the things of something like this form of art is that it asks you in the audience not only to be moved by the art, but to be involved in the art of your own action in life. And I think it's so contradictory that you see the images, they're so repetitive, right? The missiles that are coming down, and even the missiles of the stones that are thrown. The missiles are launched by people who are hiding in places or in planes or whatever. They're far removed from the people that are being killed, right? They're war gaming. And I also think then of the image of how many of, I didn't grow up this way, but I played with army men, even bottle caps, where I use them for war. And I became an anti-war like pacifist, but the war games that, video games, right? Those are in the form of toy or something that you have grown up with. And I haven't played them, but they're so violent. And so I think this just really asks all of us to think about this normalcy of violence that takes place, and how, from the eyes of children, the brutality of this thing. And to think that, I mean, we are not in the Middle East, but we are arming all the sides in this conflict. And maybe we say we're right, maybe we can say that we're wrong. Those things can be argued. But through the eyes of a child that is experiencing this as murder and mass murder, we have to ask ourselves about our own culpability. And these images, I think, are just incredibly unnerving and powerful. And I think that you've made me have to think about my own passivity.
Thank you. I will say, I get the question sometimes on whether or not I'm anti-war toy, anti-GI Joe, anti-soldiers, whatever you want to call it. And weirdly enough, the more time I spend with children in war zones, the less I am. It's not the toys, it's the play patterns of the toys, or what they're taught with the toys. And especially children in war zones almost need those toys to feel empowered over the world that they find themselves in. And so it's a little contradictory, but no, it's guiding the play, it's finding commonality and building empathy, really is the bottom line for all this. Any other questions?
So where are you going next?
Excellent question. Depends on what day you talk to me. I've got a show coming up in Belgium in 2021, and I'm very keen to start working in the Democratic Republic of Congo before then, because Belgium's history in the Congo is less than awesome. But I'm also working really hard on starting work here in the U.S., working with children affected by the crisis at the border, children in inner cities, children affected by gun violence. I think it's time to start broadening the definition of war for the context of this project. So where I go next, in some ways, depends on what doors open to me. Depends on financing, resources, that sort of thing, but it will be likely one of those two places.
You seem to go to places where there's war, but I think we have war right here in this country. Because right now, every time you turn around, there's a war going on. Somebody's pulling out automatic rifle and just shooting people. What about those people? What about the kids in Parkland?
No, as I said,
It's all happening here. You don't have to go very far.
No, absolutely not. As I said, that's very high on my list of priorities. It's finding the right organizations. It's finding the right places to go. It's contradictory. You pick a war zone, you've got UNICEF, you've got other NGOs that are devoted to kids in war zones. Whereas here, even with the migrant crisis or gun violence or whatever it is, there's not an organization that has been the right fit so far, but I'm working on that.
Can you tell us how you evolved into a toy photographer specific, and then broaden your art career? Has it always been involving toys?
Yeah, my entire career has been toys. So the kind of, I guess, long and short of it is I started experimenting with photography when I was like 13. And at that age, it's kind of when you're supposed to stop playing with toys, and I didn't want to. So they became props. And it was my excuse to kind of hang on to toys and to be a geek back before geek was a thing you could really be. At least not in Memphis, Tennessee, certainly. And so, all through high school and art school, I kept photographing toys and I experimented with other stuff, fashion, documentary, what have you, but kept coming back to it. And finally, as a sophomore at Parsons, I said, this is what I want to do. And I just, stubbornness, luck, have made it into a career. That's the short version of it. He's asking if I have a top brand. Those people pay my bills, so no, I don't. I love them all. No, I love, anytime I get to do, Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon and that kind of stuff, I'm a giant nerd, so yeah, give me that stuff, I'm happy. Way back in the back. You can ask it, I can just repeat it.
Yeah.
When you're working in the field, do you use bodyguards or how do you maintain your safety?
Yeah, I don't have a budget for that. So the question is, how do I maintain my safety? Stupid luck. No, I work closely with the NGOs and their security folks who are usually really well dialed in. I'll hire a local fixer. In Iraq, I work with CNN's guy, who's really dialed in to local authorities and knows what areas to go, what areas not to go. In Gaza, the same deal. It was through friends at CNN that I hired this guy. But I don't have body armor, I don't have bodyguards, I don't have anything. And have been stupidly lucky, to be honest. I would like to have a little more preparation or a little more whatever. When I've worked with the UN, they've been great. But it's funny, I've gotten so used to working with the smaller NGOs who have no budget that we can kind of go anywhere and do anything. And then working with the UN, they've got armored convoys and armor and whatever. And just like, I just want to go over there. Can I just go over there? And I'm like, no, you can't. But they're looking out for my safety. So no, it's a lot of luck. And you just kind of go do it and hold your breath. I've only been shot at twice. Yeah. So let's see. I've now officially been shot at twice, both on the same day. Both by sniper. I was in East Mosul, and one of those drivers I mentioned from the NGO, the joke is he's the brother-in-law that has security. He's every brother-in-law on the planet, just kind of worthless. And despite the fixer and I showing on a map where we're supposed to go, he delivered us to the front lines and didn't bother to tell us. And so I'm out, I just finished a photo, actually not long before that first photo I used as an example. And standing in the middle of the damn street, because I didn't think I'm in any danger, and a sniper took a shot at me. And we run and get cover, and I bring up Google Maps of all things. And I'm like, what, why are we here? Why are we here? I'm like talking to guys, like, this is where you wanted to go. I'm like, no, it's not, you know that. But at that point, we're now in it, you know, there's no getting out of it. So I just kept shooting, to be honest, and got some great photos. And the second time I shot it was the same day. I mean, we moved out of the sniper direct line, but stayed in the general area because, well, we're there. And I can't lose a day shooting because I'm poor and I hired these guys for the day. But ended up in this other spot that had cover, and then the driver, once again, moved the car out of cover. And I didn't realize I went to go change a battery, and the sniper took another shot at me. So that was that. But yeah, you can't do this work for 8 years and not have stories. There are minefields, there are missile strikes, there's all kinds of stuff. So. But when I enter dangerous places, it's a mistake. I'm not going to the front lines. I'm not a photojournalist. I'm not supposed to be in those places. But it just happens.
I was struck when you mentioned, like, as a photographer, you shoot. It's interesting the use of that word, shooting. But you've been at this for so long, and you've been in such traumatic places, and you're going into such a deep level to look at it through the eyes of children. I mean, I think that's very profound. I'm just curious how this has transformed you, or kind of your view of not only your art, but really as a human being.
Sure. Well, first thing, I'm a great therapist, because I have to. Coming off these trips is an adjustment, for sure. It's a lot to absorb the kids' accounts, a lot to feel the responsibility and the guilt of, got to get it right, and I get to leave. And you feel like a jerk for being able to leave. And I think I made a joke about this earlier days, around about Heathrow or somewhere like that, where I just start having a little bit of a crisis. You know, it's the person yelling at the ticket counter because they didn't get their first class seat or whatever it is, and you just roll your eyes and you get pissed off. But you get through it. So it does take a personal toll. It can be very challenging. But I get how the work is addictive in a weird way. You start seeing the veneer of civilization a lot more. You start realizing how fragile everything is. And again, the commonality of us all, and just how it's goofy. The folks who, for one reason or another, want to drive us apart and divide us and that kind of thing, and cast the people affected by it, whether it be violence or war or whatever, as the others and somehow deserving of the situations they're in. So, you know, I get pretty pissed off about it. But, yeah, personal toll, surreal glimpse into whatever the hell reality is, all kinds of stuff. Yeah. I believe you had a question?
Forgive me, but I am not real clear with what you are intending that your art will be used for. You made a point that you advocated for children, and yet I get the sense that along with that there is advocating against war for some reason, obviously. And I'm not really sure what you're really advocating for and how you hope that your work, what you hope the work will make people do.
Well, advocating for humanity is the short answer. As far as direct call to action, that doesn't exist in the work. I'm not going to stand up here and say, oh gosh, if you buy my wristband, we'll give money to these people and do this thing. That's not what it's about. I'd like to do more direct benefit type things like that, but it is about challenging notions. It is about building common empathy and common ground, and laying the foundation for more change, more efforts in this regards. So, no, it's hard to answer that really, perhaps as concisely as you'd like, but yeah, I don't know how else to answer it. Sorry.
Can I go to the other side of the spectrum and say, walk us through, you said you do a lot of your work at the camera, bombs in the air, stuff like that. What's your process to come up with those images?
Okay, oh yeah. So, all right, so it starts with the drawing, it starts with that whole process. So we'll do the interviews, I'll spend a day or two going through the drawings, looking through them all, and literally making a shopping list of toys. I'm like, oh, I really want to tell this story, so I need to get a family, I need to get a jet, I need to get a bomb, I need to get whatever. So I make this giant shopping list, and then we'll spend days going everywhere I can find to find toys, and we'll build a cast of characters, as it were. And then we'll sit in my little place that I'm staying, and sit on the floor, literally, and play with toys, and just start to audition in my mind the various elements and start to picture a composition, how I can translate that drawing into an actual physical composition. And we'll pre-build that more or less before I ever get on location. So we'll bag everything up and say, okay, these 4 toys are the toys I need, they go in a bag, get labeled, and we'll do that 50, 60 times. And then we'll go out to the field with a list of places. If I know the place, I'll go to that actual place, if we can. If not, then I'll start casting substitution places. And then it's just a matter of driving around and saying, oh, here's great, hopping on the car and doing it. Things like missiles and bombs and stuff, the flying stuff you saw in the photos, that's done in camera really simple. I just have a rod and hold the toy on a rod, and we'll just erase the rod in Photoshop. So it's still an actual moment through the lens, done pretty simply, and just a little bit of post-production to get it clean. So, yeah, that's it. It's just a lot of problem solving on no budget. Yes, sir. Yeah, the main source of funding up until forming the nonprofit, and even now the nonprofit is formed, has been me. So I'll go finish a campaign for whomever. Disney has been a wonderful client, and I'll just funnel all that money back into War Toys. And it's been so far. No, but the reverse is happening. So he asked if there's been a conflict, like I won't use someone's toy because they're a client. I won't hesitate on that. But the reverse has happened. There have been a few clients who I will not name who cannot work with me because it's a political liability. So, and those might be people who make war toys of one variety or another and don't want to seem hypocritical or whatever. So I've lost some work. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Brian,
Thank you
both
all.
for your talk, but also as amazing work.